On the flower boat, the sound of the people was like jade beads falling on a plate. Before the songstress could finish her verse, a commotion erupted at the bow. Uninvited guests barged in with blades, causing the dancers to kneel, their bodies trembling like seeds.
John Carter, you seem to be enjoying yourself.
A sharp female voice rang out. Unperturbed, I rose and bowed in greeting.
Greetings, Princess Evelyn.
As I finished speaking, the curtain was lifted by the hilt of a sword, and Princess Evelyn stepped in. Dressed in a red outfit, her long, jet-black hair tied into a ponytail, she exuded a sharp and valiant aura that rivaled any man's.
Do you know that news just arrived? Crown Prince William was nearly harmed by assailants. Your master is suffering outside. How dare you indulge in revelry in the capital?
Without a glance at me, Princess Evelyn sat in my seat and demanded.
Do you know that news just arrived? Crown Prince William was nearly harmed by assailants. Your master is suffering outside. How dare you indulge in revelry in the capital?
She grabbed my wine cup and smashed it in front of me. The crisp sound of the porcelain cup breaking frightened the delicate musicians, who buried their heads even lower. Wine splashed from the cup, staining my clothes. Yet, I remained silent, my head bowed, appearing weak and remorseful. Seeing my submissive demeanor, she grew even more furious.
All you do is indulge in women. Everyone in the city knows of your debauchery with 3 or 4 mistresses. If it weren't for the Crown Prince's childhood affection for you, you'd have been dealt with long ago. Now that he's not in the capital, you don't worry about him and even cause trouble. No wonder he doesn't want to take you on his Western tours.
She continued her tirade.
You never reflect on why, as the Crown Prince's companion, you still have no official position. You deserve it.
I knew Princess Evelyn's visit wasn't to admonish me but to vent her worries about the Crown Prince. This was also why the Crown Prince left me behind.
John Carter knows his mistake. Thank you for your guidance, Princess.
Seeing my sincerity, Mabel Johnson's anger subsided. She stood up to leave, sighing as she turned.
John, we grew up together. How did you end up like this?
She looked at me with pity in her eyes.
Even though you and Catherine are not destined to be together, you shouldn't give up on yourself. She wouldn't like it, sigh.
John forced a bitter smile. The matter of liking Catherine Lane was actually a misunderstanding, but he couldn't explain it. After all, it was when Princess Evelyn caught him retrieving a hairpin for one of the Crown Prince's companions. The next day, an identical hairpin appeared on Catherine Lane's head. Princess Evelyn thought he had improper intentions towards Catherine Lane and had dragged him to the training grounds for several days. He repeatedly assured her that he had no such thoughts before she finally let him go. Fortunately, Princess Evelyn left on her own. The place was left in disarray, and the performers were still pale with fear. John waved them away, disinterested in continuing the charade. As he prepared to get on the carriage, he noticed someone already inside, with a servant standing nervously by the side. Understanding the situation, John got on the carriage and took the driver's seat. A faint orchid fragrance wafted from inside.
John.
Through the curtain, John respectfully greeted her.
Mississippi Lane.
Just call me Catherine. We grew up together, there's no need to be so distant.
Though he couldn't see her face, John could imagine her eyes filled with worry. But it was all just a facade.
Mississippi Lane, are you here about the Crown Prince? The assailant was apprehended before any harm could be done. His Highness is unharmed. You need not worry.
His Highness's journey to the west is fraught with danger. You have been by his side since childhood, and he must find it hard without you. But it's good you didn't go, otherwise, you would have rushed to the front and gotten hurt. Seeing you safe and still in the mood for entertainment, I am relieved.
Catherine Lane was always like this. She and Mabel Johnson were completely different. Mabel was bold and fiery, while Catherine was gentle and soft. But beneath her gentle exterior, she was sharp. She seemed to worry about John, but every word was a reproach for not accompanying the Crown Prince on his journey, even suggesting that he should risk his life for him.
The Crown Prince left me in the capital to take care of Princess Evelyn and Mississippi Lane.
You take care of them so well. How was the pipa at Hua Chin Lu? I've never had the chance to enjoy it. Next time, don't forget to take Mabel and me. Or do you only want to take Mabel?
Her light words left John frozen outside the carriage.
I am not worthy. Mississippi Lane, please don't tease me.
Just a joke. You won't hold it against me, will you?
I wouldn't dare.
I'm tired. Please have the carriage take me home.
Catherine Lane took control and had John leave the carriage. John Carter knew his mistake. He bowed respectfully.
Thank you for your guidance, Princess.
John, we grew up together. How did you end up like this?
Her anger subsided as she sighed, looking at John with pity.
Even though you and Catherine are not destined to be together, you shouldn't give up on yourself. She wouldn't like it, sigh.
The call of Brother John felt like a spell, freezing him in place. Once, when they were children, she used to call him that too. But things had changed, and nothing was the same anymore. As he stood there in a daze, Mabel Johnson climbed down from the bed, her eyes hazy as she walked towards him, her already loose dress slipping off her shoulder.
Brother John, I'm so warm.
Her tone was unusually sweet. John was used to seeing the valiant Mabel Johnson, and her sudden coquettishness made his heart flutter. When he came back to his senses, she was already pressed against him. He could feel her well-toned body, now soft and boneless, and her warm hands roamed freely over him. Seeing her hand about to touch somewhere inappropriate, his rationality finally returned. He had no choice but to knock her out with a swift chop. Holding the unconscious Mabel Johnson, he felt like he was holding a hot potato. Suppressing the turmoil in his heart, he resolutely carried Mabel Johnson out of the courtyard. Just as he landed, Catherine Lane, who he had left behind, came running over with tearful eyes.
Brother John, I thought you didn't want me anymore.
Seeing the usually composed and proper Mississippi Lane showing such vulnerability, he couldn't help but marvel at the potency of the substance that had clouded their minds, making them forget who they truly liked. If they woke up and realized they had been acting this way towards him instead of the Crown Prince, they would surely be mortified. Seeing his lack of response, Catherine Lane became even more aggrieved and reached out to push Mabel Johnson away from his arms.
Now that you have Mabel Johnson, you don't want me anymore? Why are you always like this?
John couldn't make sense of Catherine Lane's accusations and assumed she was just talking nonsense. Fearing Mabel Johnson would wake up, he grabbed Catherine Lane's hand to stop her from pushing. He thought she would resist, but to his surprise, she became unusually quiet. Looking down at her, he saw her gazing at him with sultry eyes, biting her red lips shyly. Catherine Lane's delicate fingers lightly traced his palm, making him shiver involuntarily.
Brother John, do you like this?
Her eyes grew more intense, as if she wanted to devour him. Afraid she might do something even bolder, he had no choice but to knock her out as well. With the two future crown princesses finally quiet, he let out a long sigh of relief. Such a test is not something every man can withstand. But setting aside their titles, one being the daughter of the Prime Minister and the other a princess, he couldn't handle them either. With great ambitions still ahead of him, he could only act like a saint. After returning them to their respective places, he went straight home. The incident involving the future crown princesses being drugged had to be kept tightly under wraps. He pretended to know nothing. With the means of their families, it would be easy to find out what happened at the Huacheng Pavilion and deal with it. But days passed without any movement from the Prime Minister's residence or the Duke's mansion, as if they were swallowing the bitter pill in silence. He was puzzled but couldn't ask directly. Then the Crown Prince sent him a message by pigeon. The letter was vague, only mentioning that someone in the capital might be plotting against him and asking John to investigate. He didn't know what trouble the Crown Prince had stirred up outside, but as the Crown Prince, he didn't need to explain himself to John. Since Catherine Lane and Mabel Johnson were kidnapped, the capital had become unusually quiet again. John found nothing regarding the Crown Prince's matter. His subordinates said he had been overworked for days. He guessed he was ill too. Otherwise, why would the figures of the two future crown princesses haunt his dreams every night? In the middle of the night, John woke from a restless dream. Resigned, he got up to change and decided to practice swordsmanship in the courtyard. Under the cover of darkness, a graceful figure landed lightly in the courtyard. It was Princess Evelyn, Mabel Johnson.
What a coincidence, John, you're awake too.
John quickly turned his head away, embarrassed by the overlap of his dream and reality.
Princess Evelyn, it's late and not safe. You should go back to rest.
Do you dislike me so much that you don't even want to look at me?
John was puzzled. Such weak words didn't seem like something Mabel would say. Was it the lingering effects of that night's events?
I remember we were so close when we were young. You, as the Crown Prince's companion, always protected me first, even getting punished for it. Is it because of Catherine Lane? That day, you saved her first. Do you know how scared I was, alone in that den of evil?
John's shame deepened as he knelt on one knee to apologize.
I'm sorry, it was my incompetence that failed to protect you and Mississippi Lane. I didn't think things through when rescuing you. Please forgive me, Princess.
Mabel grew more exasperated, grabbing John's collar.
You've kept 3 or 4 companions already. How can you still be so dense? No, those companions are.
She abruptly stopped, her anger deflating.
Forget it. It's not urgent. You can go.
Princess, this is my home.
Then go back to sleep. I want to stay here and admire the moon. Is that not allowed?
Of course not.
Watching Mabel's changing expressions, John felt a pang of emotion.
I should still escort you back.
Very well.
After a moment of silence, Mabel regained her usual carefree demeanor.
It's been a while since we sparred. Let's have a match at the training ground tomorrow.
John nodded in agreement, reassured by Mabel's return to form. The next morning, John was kidnapped before dawn. The cloth covering his eyes was removed, revealing Catherine Lane sitting gracefully in the main seat.
Mississippi Lane, what is this about?
Catherine didn't look at him, focusing instead on her tea.
My father is worried about my safety and won't let me leave. I couldn't come to see you, so I had to bring you here.
Compared to Mabel's erratic behavior the previous night, Catherine's cold demeanor was somewhat reassuring.
Is there something you need, Mississippi Lane?
I wanted to ask if anything happened that night.
Realizing Catherine wanted to ensure his silence, John quickly reassured her.
I've been going to bed early these days and haven't left the house. Mississippi Lane can rest assured, the Crown Prince has always instructed me to take good care of you and follow your orders.
Catherine listened and then laughed coldly.
That night, I clearly, and yet you deny it. You're truly loyal to the Crown Prince, a good dog indeed.
Suddenly, Mabel became emotional.
John, you are truly heartless. We grew up together. If I had no connection with the Crown Prince, would you even care about my well-being? I should have asked the Crown Prince to bring you to me, and then, you would have stayed obediently by my side.
Catherine Lane, who always maintained her composure, lost her temper in front of John. She never spoke like this before. Now, she looked at him with disdain, hurling insults. When John first saw the delicate and refined Catherine, he felt a desire to be close to her. She was strictly disciplined, even at a young age, having to restrain her desires. He saw her longing gaze at other children eating pastries, but she dared not eat them herself. So, he bought a candied hawthorn from a street vendor and secretly brought it into the palace. Unexpectedly, Catherine's first reaction upon seeing the candied hawthorn was to report John to the tutor. He was severely punished with 10 strokes of the ruler.
Without rules, nothing can be accomplished. This is for your own good. The palace is different from the outside world.
At that time, Mabel also stepped in, disapproving of Catherine's fussiness, and scolded John.
How can you bring such unclean things from commoners into the palace?
The distinction between ranks was an eternal chasm between John and them. He could only become more cautious, turning into the wooden figure they spoke of. Between them, there would only ever be the relationship of ruler and subject. He remained silent.
Wooden, truly a piece of rotten wood. Are you like this with Mabel too?
John was about to speak when she immediately interrupted.
I don't want to hear it. You may leave.
Before John left, Catherine regained her dignified and aloof demeanor, as if the scene of her questioning him was just an illusion. After that night, John felt something strange between Catherine and Mabel. Thinking of Mabel, he remembered their agreement and hurried out, seeing her waiting near the Prime Minister's residence as if she had known all along. Once in the carriage, Mabel scrutinized John before tentatively asking,
Did Catherine say anything to you?
Mississippi Lane seemed to be in a bad mood.
Mabel instantly understood and even chuckled.
It's nothing. She'll figure it out on her own. Don't worry about her. Let's go to the training ground.
When John returned home that night, just as Mabel had said, Catherine seemed to have figured something out and sent a pile of rare treasures as an apology. He returned them, and she sent even more. With 3 boxes of items, he didn't know what to do. Mabel also joined in, sending several boxes of weapons. They seemed to be competing, sending increasingly rare and peculiar items. Meanwhile, John lived in constant fear in his residence. Not long after, the peace was shattered. Crown Prince William was exposed for embezzlement, frequenting brothels, and even forcing women into compromising situations. The emperor was furious and had him brought back overnight, stripping him of his title and imprisoning him. All those involved in his western expedition were investigated. As one of William's close associates, John was also implicated. Both the King of Jean and the Prime Minister spoke on his behalf. In the end, he was punished with 20 strokes and sent home to reflect on his actions. As John lay on his bed recovering, the past few days felt like a dream. The heavy burden of the Crown Prince was lifted so easily. He had no connections with the King of Jean or the Prime Minister, so why did they help him? Perhaps they were behind William's downfall. Could it be that Mabel and Catherine said something? Weren't they deeply in love with the Crown Prince? Surely it wasn't for his sake? As John's thoughts wandered, there was a commotion outside. The next moment, Mabel burst in, triumphantly addressing Catherine, who was a few steps behind.
Hee, I won, didn't I?
Catherine glanced at her, brushed her not-so-messy hair, and walked towards John, softly asking,
John, are your injuries serious?
Mabel, feeling outdone, rushed to his bedside, trying to lift his blanket.
Let me see how bad it is.
When Crown Prince William was out enjoying himself, someone needed to soothe the women he left behind in the capital. And John became the best candidate for the job. Whether it was the official Crown Princess candidate or his other companions, John took on all of Crown Prince William's romantic debts. In the end, he was left with nothing but the title of the prince's study companion, with his career prospects seemingly out of reach. Mabel Johnson's light words left John feeling desolate, but he could only clench his fists and endure.
John Carter acknowledges his mistake and thanks Princess Evelyn for her guidance.
Seeing his sincerity, Mabel Johnson's anger dissipated. She stood up to leave, sighing as she turned.
John, we grew up together, the four of us. How did you end up like this?
She looked at John with eyes full of pity.
Even though you and Catherine Lane are not meant to be, you shouldn't let yourself fall like this. She wouldn't like it, sigh.
Mabel's demeanor shifted suddenly. She blew a breath onto John's neck, her previous panic replaced by a bright smile.
John, you really do worry about me.
John recalled a memory from their childhood.
I remember you learned to swim at the age of 8 and even dared to catch fish in the Imperial Gardens pond. I got punished for that incident.
Feeling annoyed, John tried to leave, but Mabel held him tightly. Their clothes were soaked, and her warm body pressed against his in the cold lake water.
John, this is the second time. You need to take responsibility.
Mabel, you once told me you didn't want to be confined within high walls. You wanted to fight on the battlefield and become an invincible general. But now, you're acting like those women in the inner court, trying to bind someone with love. You're not binding me, you're binding yourself.
Mabel's smile faded as John's words hit home. She loosened her grip on him. Catherine Lane, standing on the shore, seemed lost in thought. Seeing that they hadn't come up yet, she suddenly jumped into the water. Unlike Mabel, Catherine truly couldn't swim.
Catherine, what are you doing?
John quickly pulled her up. Catherine, still in shock, clung to him, gasping for breath.
Why did you jump in? You're just causing more trouble.
His words weren't harsh, but Catherine immediately teared up, looking at him with hurt eyes.
Can't I? Why can Mabel do it, but I can't? Why has she always lived so freely, and everyone loves her? Why can't I?
Water dripped from her wet hair, trailing down her face, neck, and shoulders. Despite her disheveled state, Catherine was still ethereally beautiful. Her tear-filled eyes made John feel immensely guilty.
Mississippi Lane, if you wish, the inner court cannot confine you. I know your talents better than anyone. The world is vast, and you can explore it freely. If you want, I can help you.
Catherine's eyes lit up, and John saw her old spirited self return. He led the two of them ashore. They tacitly agreed never to speak of what happened in the lake. A month later, Catherine opened a nursery in the capital, taking in and educating orphans. She said it was not only a charitable act but also a way to gain support in the future. Meanwhile, John passed the imperial examination, and Mabel planned to go to the frontier after his palace exam. She even partnered with Catherine to open a shop, becoming popular among the noble women in the capital. On the day of the palace exam, John's essay on people's livelihood was praised by the emperor, who named him the top scholar. Both the king and the prime minister requested marriage for their daughters, and their chosen son-in-law was John. The emperor laughed heartily, giving him 3 days to decide. Leaving the palace, John was still troubled, almost wanting to bang his head against the ground. Catherine and Mabel, who had been waiting for a long time, jumped off the carriage and ran towards him joyfully.
John!
Who would it be, Catherine or Mabel?